looks like it's still going. Okay, I'll have to edit. All right, so in your kit, everybody should have found your yarn, and it was wrapped around your cardboard loom. So if you haven't already, go ahead and unwrap those, lay your fibers out where you can access them easily. You'll also find that there was a small dowel, and the dowel is going to actually serve two purposes. On the finished project, we're going to use it to hang. So we have a little tiny tapestry that we finished here. But while we're working on the project, I'm actually using it to help hold this yarn up as I'm weaving, make it easier to get the needle under and over on the board. These nice big plastic needles, easy to work with, and they're going to help us weave our fabric. And then you should also have a little piece of silver ribbon that you will use to hang. And then you also have your tea bag. And if you haven't had a chance to make up your tea, you're welcome to get that going tonight. They've been a wonderful herbal tea. I've been sharing these at the last couple of creativities. So I'm going to set that aside. A little brief introduction. I already talked about a couple of weaving tools. The cool thing about a cardboard loom, I was able to purchase some that were pre-notched, but you can make your own very easily. You can make a round one and do notches all the way around and create a round design. These ones, you can make them bigger. The flat looms like this, you can actually make it as a single side tapestry, but you can also wrap it all the way around and you can make a pouch. So some other supplies that you might want are a little bit of masking tape, scotch tape, duct tape, anything like that. We're using it just simply to kind of keep some yarn in place if we haven't, ends that haven't been woven in yet. Aside from that, if you're working with like a table loom, which is a bigger flat one, you may end up wanting to purchase a shuttle or make your own shuttle. And shuttles typically are oval and they'll have the yarn kind of wrapped around this way, and you use it instead of a needle to weave. But that for a project of this size, it's not something that we readily need. So the process of hand weaving itself is pretty easy, pretty simple. You're going to start by stringing your loom with your warp thread, which is what you're seeing already woven on this one. And so for your warp thread today, I gave extra of the white. And so that is what we'll be using. So if you want to fish out your white and your loom, and I'll talk a little bit more about doing your warp, and then we can start wrapping those around. So you'll start by wrapping your warp using vertical threads, and then you're going to be passing the weft, or the horizontal thread, over and under, alternating around your warp threads. By passing the weft back and forth across it, so we're going to be kind of, we go one direction, come back the other. That's how you're weaving your textile. So they are the two main components, warp and weft, of weaving, unlike knitting, which is done with one continuous thread. Because the warp and weft are separate, you can use different yarns in different combinations to create interesting effects. Some of the different elements of weaving can be altered in order to produce unique textures. And Bonnie talked briefly about that in some of the basketry that she shared with us. So one way to vary it is you can use a different number of strands for the warp and the weft if you wanted to. You can use different types of yarn. Like I grabbed a couple of my fun fibers that I had hanging around. I could work this into my project. I gave just kind of a velour one because I liked that it had kind of a soft watercolor look to it. You are welcome to incorporate any fibers, threads, ribbons, natural materials you want in this. Your cardboard loom will be one if you remove things without breaking off the little prongs or cutting those off, then you'll be able to reuse that. But the idea tonight was to give us a simple project that we can hopefully complete in the hour and 7 minutes we have left. So, but incorporating those, so like one of the things I did is I didn't incorporate a new thread, but I kind of did a little piece where I had a little texture added by like the snow on my mountains and my water and my land at the bottom. So this little project is a very loosely designed little sunset scene. And to give you an idea of kind of what I wove is, it's very basic. I just took the green and went here, and you can see I started to angle. Then I did blue, and then I did my darker gray, my lighter gray, a little bit of white for snow, a sun here, and then I used another light blue for the sky. It's up to you if you want to try and recreate this design. You have all the colors and the yarn you need for it. But if it's easier for you tonight, you're also welcome to just go straight across one color at a time. You can switch your colors off anytime that you want. And I'll talk a little bit as well about how to kind of create those gradual slopes and working that into your project as well. There are tons and tons of fabulous YouTube videos out there on weaving and weaving on flat looms. So I encourage you to kind of dig in and look and see what you like. What I love about the creativity programs is I provide materials, but everybody's projects tend to turn out a little different. Everybody has a different vision of what they like. And so if you're wanting to incorporate other things, even ribbon, I have like some sheer ribbon I could do a row with. It's very easy to do. So one of the things as you're working is you have the control over the tightness of your weave. And the weave is the going, back and forth here. And I can squish things down really, really tight, or I can give them a little bit of space, and you're more likely to see your weft yarn, your warp yarn if you don't push things super tight, you're going to see more of that warp yarn peeking through.
Hey, Cheryl, I think we lost your video here.
There we go.
That's better.
Sorry. That's the fun of Apple being completely interconnected. My iPad wants me to answer my phone too. So sorry about that. Okay, so you have control over how tight your weave is. And when you do this, when we're talking about unique materials, it does not have to be yarn. It doesn't have to be fibers. It can be natural materials. Maybe you can get some really long, beautiful, some of that grass that we grow that can get really, really long and stiff. You could pick up and do like cedar bark, but any natural materials you want, anything that you can kind of weave through there will work. And it adds texture and dimension, and it really makes for kind of a fun project. So, and I even cut up old t-shirts as options with that. So the last thing I want to share with you before we just start diving completely into the project is a couple of books that are in the library's collection. This cardboard loom weaving is great. It has a wide variety of different projects in it. And I know there is a circulating copy of this. And this gives you a good introduction to weaving basics, the tools you might need, different types of yarn, as well as how to get started with different types of cardboard looms and making your own. So encourage you to check out that one. I also love this one called the Weaving Explorer. And I happen to know that Bonnie worked on doing one with the round loom recently, she mentioned to me. And then, so there's an example of that. But this has a wide variety of different projects. You can see some of the amazing art that people create doing tapestries. So this one shares projects, but it also gives you kind of instructional pieces and ways to do, different ways to do weaving. And then my third one, whether you have kids in your house or not, this is actually the first weaving book that I ever used. I was working for the YMCA, and we started out with a cardboard loom and made these little treasure pouches. One of the other cool things about this, if you want a more inexpensive way of creating a loom, they have a fabulous design for creating a PVC pipe loom using PVC that you would buy like at a hardware store. So if you're interested in creating your own, you've got this as an option as well. So that one was called Kids Weaving, and the Weaving Explorer and Cardboard Loom Weaving are the three that I'm sharing here. All right, so what I'd like to do now is have everybody grab their cardboard loom and their white yarn. And we are going to start by leaving an inch or two tail, and we're going to push this through one of the notches on the upper right or upper left. It doesn't matter which one you start on. It's all going to finish out that way. So that's the back that you're seeing there. Liz, do we have any questions yet? I know I haven't done too much instruction, but I just want to make sure.
Nope, we're doing all right.
Okay, perfect. So once you tuck that through the first notch, I just taped it down. You don't have to tape it. I just find it easier to keep track of it. So now we're going to turn it over and we're going to go to the opposite side, the corresponding notch, and we're going to pull that through. I'm pulling it somewhat tight, but not so tight that it'll be impossible to get off my loom at the end. And the other reason I picked this yarn is it is pretty stretchy, so it'll make it easier to remove our projects. Okay, so we started on the back through the notch, then I brought it up through the top notch. Now, if you wanted to create a pouch, and you certainly can, you could continue on the back, going up to the next one and wrap all the way around, all the way across. That would create like a pouch and you'd weave on both sides. But what we're going to do tonight is we're just going to weave on one side. So we need to create our, we're going to create our warp by, so back, first notch, up to the top, down, and then on the back side, instead of coming down, we're going to move over one notch, tuck that in. Sometimes I kind of had to pull those apart a little bit. Okay, so you can see I just went over and down through the next notch. Now it's on the front. I'm going to come down to the bottom to my next notch, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come up right next to it. So you can see how we're going to get like a little row of every other bump here and here. So I want you to continue doing that. And if you find that you got one that you wrapped on the back, then you're going to need to unwind and bring it back to this. So on the front, I went up to the notch, over to the adjacent notch, back down to the other end, and up through the one next to it. So I'm going to continue doing that and have everybody doing that as well. So down, up to the one next to it, back up, up through the one next to it, down, up through the one next to it. Is that working for everybody so far? So this is your warp. This is the vertical yarn that we are doing. So when you get to the end, you should see that you'll have little bumps across top and bottom. And my last one, I'm going to come down in there. I'm just going to cut this piece off a little if I don't lose my scissors. I know they're here. Take them from myself. I'll never do that. Okay, so I'm gonna trim.
We've got a question here. How tight should it be?
You want it to be like not falling off, but again, because and it's going to depend on what you use for your warp thread. So some warp threads, and if you're trying to do a tighter weave, you would want it tighter. This one I would say snug, but know that you should be able to like pull it up a little bit because you want to be able to weave under it. And I had originally considered doing a lighter thread. So you can see this one has tinier, like a string. And this would work as well, but this also does give kind of a tighter weave. You're less likely to see your warp thread with this one. So, give everybody a moment. Is everybody getting through adding their warp okay? So the front side will look like this. The back side should look loosely like that. And once you have completed that, if you're trying to create the little landscape design that we're doing, you're going to want to find your green yarn. Otherwise, you can choose to weave in any order you want with whatever fibers you want. So let me get this ready, grab my needle. The other thing I wanted to mention now is as I mentioned early on, I am putting just a little cardboard placeholder in here. And I'm using that to make sure I have room to create little tied off tassels on the bottom of my project when I'm done. You don't have to do that, but you can also just mark it with like a pencil or pen so you know where you want to stop. And all I did for that was took, like I mentioned, a recipe card, I folded it in thirds, and then I stuck it underneath my warp threads. So go like that. So our warp threads are on. If you want a spacer, you can add that now. And then now we're going to grab our dowel. And what our dowel is going to do is we're going to slide it underneath all of the warp threads. And what this does is it helps us kind of lift it as we're weaving. As you can see that really well, but we're going to use that to help us get our needle over and under. With this yarn, it's pretty stretchy, but it can definitely be helpful when you get towards the end if you're trying to weave in really tight at the top. And it also, with that, and so if you're working with it like a less stretchy fiber, you're really gonna appreciate that little lift that this little dowel gives you at the top. So for here, we've got our warp on, we have our spacer if you want to use it. I have my dowel sitting in the top. So next, let me bring this back a little. There we go. Okay, so next I'm gonna grab my green yarn. Two of them going here, so I need to clarify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start weaving my green yarn. And because it's kind of fluffy, instead of leaving the tail hanging down, I'm actually going to kind of find a way to get it tied in early. And as you're working through your project and changing colors of yarn, it's up to you. You can stop and weave those ends in right as you go, or you can wait till the end of the project and do it then as well.
We've got somebody who has a knot in their yarn. Is that okay?
Depends on where it's at. If you're not able to get it out, you may want to, is it in your warp or is it in your green that you're working through? That would be the question. Yeah, if it's in your green, if you can't get it out, you can always just trim the yarn on either side of the knot, and then you'll just have if you need to, it would just be like changing yarn during the project. Either that or you can leave it in and it'll be an added bonus of texture when you get to that point as well. So there's kind of choices with that. We kind of ride this balance of really long pieces of yarn that are kind of a little bit tedious to work with, and cutting them a little bit shorter if that makes it a little easier. So if I've given you some really long pieces and you want to trim them, you can definitely do that. So to get started with weaving, we are going to be going over and under. So our warp is this way. This is our weft, and we're going to be going over and under our yarn. So I'm going to start here at the bottom where the spacer is with that plastic needle, and I'm just going to start going over, under, over, under, over. So you can see that there. So one thing that can be helpful as you're pulling this through is if you kind of hold it at a little bit of an angle, you can slide it through, and I'm getting down to kind of, you see my end here. And then this is where your fork comes in handy. You can use it to slide the fiber down to the bottom. Now with this, you want things to be tight enough, but not too tight. And this is also where you kind of choose how tightly you want those tucked together. It'll go faster if you're not as tight with that weave. What I'm going to do now with this, because I wanted to work it in early, is I'm pulling my needle from my other end of my working yarn, and I'm just going to slip a tail in there, and I'm just going to go over. Actually going to go. So I'm going to go under, because I started out there. So now I need to go over, under, over, under, over, under. And I'm only going part way across. And I'm just using this to weave my end in. And again, you can leave it till the very end. You'll have a few ends to be weaving in. So I'm just gonna pull that. You can see what happened when I tugged it, it kind of pulled it tight. So as I'm working, I use my fingers to kind of make sure that these are nice and straight up and down, and I'm not pulling too tightly so that the sides are bowing in. So you can see that. Now what I'm doing with this is I'm going to trim this little bit of yarn here. I could leave it sticking out for now as well, but I just kind of wove my end in there. So now I'm back to my working yarn, and we are just going to continue going over and back. So one of the easiest things to do, you find that you're not weaving, is making sure I got to the end of the row, I came from under it. So when I go back, I need to make sure I go over it. Because if I go under and repeat that pattern, I'm just gonna pull my yarn out that I just put in there. So instead, now I'm gonna go, I came out under, I'm gonna go over, under, over, under. In that place of hold it up high, make sure you can see it. I can't see what I'm doing. Okay, so you can see I did that slight kind of diagonal to it again. I'm gonna pull that through, and I'm gonna just kind of pull it down gently. I can use that fork. You can use your fingers. And again, you can see that inclination is to kind of pull a little bit tight on that. So I just want to make sure I'm pulled back to make sure I'm not getting that too tight. And you'll see where we wove the tail in, there's like a little extra layer of yarn, but by the time we're done, you're not going to see that little extra thickness sticking up. Okay. So now we just want to continue weaving with our green. I would suggest if you're going to do the landscape piece, 8 or 10 passes total. And again, you're in control of that. I'm just going to continue to go over and back. Try to keep an eye on my time here. So we're at 7:10. Okay. So I'm going to pull, use my fork to slide it down. And I'm going to continue back. So over, under. So I'm on my 4th pass right now. And again, making sure I'm not pulling things too tight. And don't worry, like my tail's starting to sneak out. I'll weave that back in later. So you can see if I don't pull it super tight here, if I don't push that down super tight, you can see the white poking out. It almost looks like a checkerboard. If you like that design look, you can do that. I'm going to do this one that way tonight just to get through it more quickly. I'm not going to necessarily pull it as tight as I did on my first project. So that's 4 in for me. So you can go till you're done with your yarn. You could switch out when you feel ready to. You should have a generous amount there, plenty to complete the project. So we're just going to keep working our way. Oh, if you're like me, got a little tail going on. There we go. And I'm just always kind of constantly looking to make sure that I'm not wrapping it too tight around the sides. So you can slide your dowel down if you want to help lift your yarn up if you're finding that you did your warp really tight. That can be helpful as well. So I'm on number 6. And the cool thing here is this is not exact. You know, you can put in 4 rows, you can put in 20 rows. You choose the color elements and how you put them in there. My goal with this tonight is to just give everybody kind of that introduction, some of the terminology and some of the tools that you need. And what I love about this is it's pretty inexpensive. I mean, you could go to Goodwill and grab a bag of donated yarn and be weaving with a little bit of cardboard, a plastic needle. You have the plastic needle now and a dowel. So you do decide to make your own looms. The cardboard that's best for this is generally corrugated. You'd want to make sure it's not a double thick corrugated one though, just like a single corrugated. For the little spacer here, I find cereal box cardboard works great for that. Oh, I need to shorten my tail. Okay. So I've got 6 rows in. I am pulling a little tight. So while your yarn is on here, this is a chance to loosen if you need to. I'm a little over, I tend to pull mine a little tight, so I'm always having to work with that. So is everybody doing okay? Getting their grain in there? So again, you could continue with this project tonight and just do straight across rows until you are ready to change a color. You can end at the end of a row, you could end in the middle of a row. And I'm going to talk in a minute here about how to do that, where I get the slope for the grass, how I make that work without having like a gap in my weaving. So we're almost there. I'm going to do a few more of the grain. Use that fork to push things down again. Do one more back. So I tend to do this kind of in pair row. The rows are kind of in pairs for me. But if you lose track, it's okay. You can do it the way you want to. So what I'm going to do with this next row is I have now put in 10 rows and I'm kind of creeping down into my spacer. So I'm going to push that back up again. I've created 10 rows and I'm going to kind of create just a little bit of a gentle slope to give a little bit of that landscape look to it. So to do that, I'm going to start my first row going from right to left. I'm going to do a full row. So I'm going to go, I went over last, I'm going to go under, over, under. Here. And then on my return trip, I'm actually going to turn it around a little bit early. I'm not going to go over and under all of my warp threads. I'm going to stop a couple shy. So what that looks like is I'm at the end of this, I'm in the middle of, this is like row 11. I'm going to go over, under, and I am going to stop at where I'm going to go over my third one in from the end, and I'm not going to go over and under the last 2. So you can see I've got a cut on my thumb. So I've got there, I'm stopping there. Tuck those down a little bit. The third row, the third warp thread, I came up over it, so I'm going to go around it and go under, weave my way back